The halls of Graceview General Hospital buzzed with life, a constant symphony of beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, and murmured conversations. Amid this orchestrated chaos was Dr. Adrian Lockwood, a man whose name was synonymous with brilliance. At 45, he was a seasoned specialist in emergency medicine and had recently been appointed head of the hospital's Special Services Unit, a prestigious division known for handling critical cases with precision. Dr. Lockwood's reputation preceded him. He was not only a skilled physician but also a natural leader whose charisma and unyielding work ethic inspired those around him. Equally vital to the fabric of Graceview was Nurse Caroline Hayes. At 33, Caroline was one of the most respected nurses in the hospital, often referred to as the backbone of the ER. Her patients adored her empathetic demeanor, while her colleagues admired her tireless dedication and ability to stay calm under pressure. Caroline's sunny disposition and infectious laugh made her a beloved figure in the hospital, even as the long hours and emotional toll of her work weighed heavily on her. On the surface, the lives of Dr. Lockwood and Nurse Hayes seemed ideal. Adrian was married to his college sweetheart, Emily, a literature professor at the local university. They had 2 teenage children and lived in a picturesque suburban neighborhood. Caroline, on the other hand, was newly engaged to her boyfriend of 5 years, Derek, a software engineer. Her Instagram feed was peppered with pictures of weekend hikes, cozy dinners, and her sparkling engagement ring, a promise of a happy future. Dr. Adrian Lockwood and Nurse Caroline Hayes first met on a chaotic night in Graceview General Hospital's emergency room. A multi-car pileup had sent a flood of patients streaming through the hospital doors, testing the limits of the staff. Amid the frenzy, Adrian's commanding presence helped steer the team through the crisis. He barked orders with precision, demonstrating the confidence of someone who thrived under pressure. Caroline, on the other hand, proved indispensable with her ability to anticipate needs and act swiftly, her calm demeanor a soothing counterbalance to the tension in the room. When the night finally quieted, Adrian found himself in the break room, rubbing his temples to ward off exhaustion. Caroline walked in, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. She offered him one with a warm smile, sparking the first real conversation between them. "You handled that like a pro," she said, her voice tinged with admiration. Adrian chuckled. "Team effort. You were incredible out there, by the way." Their exchange was brief but left a lasting impression on both. Adrian admired Caroline's poise and compassion, qualities he had seen fade in many colleagues over time. Caroline, meanwhile, was struck by Adrian's focus and the subtle vulnerability beneath his otherwise confident exterior. In the weeks that followed, their interactions became more frequent. Whether exchanging patient updates or passing each other in the corridors, they began to share fleeting moments of connection. These seemingly inconsequential interactions laid the foundation for a bond that would soon evolve into something far more complicated. Both Adrian and Caroline were at pivotal points in their lives. Adrian, despite his professional success, felt increasingly estranged from his wife, Emily. Their conversations had dwindled to logistical exchanges about their children, and their once passionate relationship had become a hollow partnership. Caroline, too, was grappling with doubts about her engagement to Derek. While she loved him, their relationship lacked the spark and depth she craved. In each other, Adrian and Caroline found an escape. Adrian was drawn to Caroline's vitality and warmth, qualities that reminded him of the person he used to be before the weight of his responsibilities took their toll. Caroline, in turn, was captivated by Adrian's intellect and the sense of security he exuded. Their attraction was undeniable, yet both were acutely aware of the risks involved. Their relationship took a decisive turn during a hospital training seminar. Adrian and Caroline had been assigned to lead a workshop together, a responsibility that required hours of preparation. Late one evening, as they pored over notes in Adrian's office. Their conversation drifted to personal topics. "You know," Caroline said, her voice soft, "sometimes I wonder if I'm making the right choices. It feels like I'm just going through the motions." Adrian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I think we all feel that way sometimes. But it's rare to meet someone who makes you question everything." The tension between them was palpable, and when their eyes met, the barrier between professional colleagues and something more crumbled. Their first kiss was tentative but electric, a moment that forever changed the nature of their relationship. From the outset, Adrian and Caroline knew their affair had to remain a secret. The consequences of exposure were catastrophic. Adrian's career, his family, and Caroline's engagement would all be destroyed. They established strict rules to avoid suspicion, meeting only in secluded locations and communicating through encrypted apps. Their secret meetings were charged with a mix of passion and paranoia. They would rendezvous in hotel rooms on Adrian's rare afternoons off, their stolen hours filled with equal parts euphoria and dread. Every moment together felt like a rebellion against the constraints of their lives, an intoxicating escape that neither could resist. However, their clandestine relationship wasn't without its struggles. Caroline wrestled with guilt over betraying Derek, often questioning whether her feelings for Adrian justified the pain she was causing. Adrian, too, was tormented by the duplicity of his actions, particularly when he saw the toll it took on Emily and their children. Despite their inner turmoil, their bond only deepened. They confided in each other about their fears and dreams, forging a connection that felt unshakable. Adrian began to envision a future where they could be together openly, while Caroline clung to the hope that their love could somehow exist without destroying their worlds. As their relationship progressed, maintaining secrecy became increasingly challenging. Adrian's behavior began to shift. He became more irritable and distracted at home, raising Emily's suspicions. Caroline, too, struggled to hide her feelings, her interactions with Derek becoming strained and distant. The stress of their dual lives began to take its toll. Their once passionate encounters were frequently interrupted by arguments, often sparked by jealousy or the impossibility of their situation. Caroline questioned whether Adrian would ever leave his family, while Adrian accused her of doubting his commitment. "You don't understand what I'm risking for us," Adrian said during one heated exchange. "And you don't understand how it feels to be second to everything else in your life," Caroline shot back. Despite their disagreements, they couldn't stay apart. Their love, though fraught with complications, was a lifeline for both, a beacon in the darkness of their respective struggles. The first cracks in their carefully constructed facade appeared when a colleague noticed their closeness. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a fellow physician and longtime friend of Adrian, observed their interactions with growing suspicion. Though nothing overtly inappropriate had occurred in front of others, the subtle cues, a lingering glance, a shared laugh, did not escape Sarah's keen eye. "Are you and Caroline close?" Sarah asked Adrian one evening, her tone casual but probing. Adrian's response was measured, but the question planted a seed of anxiety. If Sarah had noticed, who else might be piecing together the truth? For Caroline, the strain of secrecy began to manifest in other ways. She started pulling away from Derek, canceling plans and avoiding conversations about their wedding. Derek, initially chalking up her behavior to work stress, grew increasingly concerned. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked one evening. Caroline hesitated, her heart pounding. "No, it's just... the hospital's been overwhelming lately." Though her words seemed to placate him, Derek's unease lingered. Despite the mounting tension, Adrian and Caroline continued their affair, clinging to the fleeting moments of happiness it brought them. They convinced themselves that they could keep their secret indefinitely, that their love was worth the risks they were taking. But the walls were closing in, and the fragile balance they had maintained was about to collapse. Their motivations, though deeply personal, had set them on a path fraught with peril. A path that would ultimately lead to a tragedy neither could have foreseen. The affair, once a source of exhilaration, had become a dangerous game of deception, one that could only end in heartbreak. The stage was set for a series of events that would irrevocably alter their lives and leave a trail of devastation in its wake. The months leading up to the crime were marked by escalating turmoil. Adrian Lockwood and Caroline Hayes, once so careful in maintaining the secrecy of their affair, were unraveling under the pressure. Their clandestine relationship had begun to infect every aspect of their lives, and the consequences were becoming impossible to contain. For Adrian, the stress was overwhelming. Emily, his wife, had grown suspicious of his erratic behavior. Late-night texts, unexplained absences, and his distant demeanor had not gone unnoticed. Emily, a sharp and intuitive woman, began quietly investigating. She checked his phone one night, only to find it devoid of personal messages, a glaring anomaly that deepened her suspicions. Meanwhile, Caroline's relationship with Derek was falling apart. She was avoiding wedding planning altogether, making vague excuses about work and postponing decisions. Derek, once patient, had grown increasingly frustrated. One evening, during an argument, he demanded to know the truth. "Are you seeing someone else?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Caroline hesitated for a moment too long. "Of course not," she replied, but her words rang hollow. These cracks in their personal lives mirrored the growing strain in their relationship. Caroline felt abandoned, convinced that Adrian would never leave his family for her. Adrian, in turn, was resentful of Caroline's impatience, believing she failed to appreciate the risks he was taking. Their arguments became more frequent and explosive, their once passionate bond fraying under the weight of their lies. Desperation has a way of clouding judgment, and for Adrian, the pressure of maintaining his double life reached a breaking point. Faced with the threat of losing everything, his career, his family, and his reputation, Adrian began to entertain dark thoughts. The idea took root during a particularly heated argument with Caroline. She had confronted him about his reluctance to leave Emily, accusing him of stringing her along. "You don't love me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You just love the idea of me." Adrian, furious and cornered, lashed out. "Do you have any idea what I've risked for you? Do you think it's that simple to walk away from a life I've spent decades building?" The argument ended with Caroline storming out, but the seeds of a grim solution had been planted in Adrian's mind. If Caroline were gone, he reasoned, all his problems would disappear. He could salvage his marriage, protect his career, and bury the affair forever. The plan crystallized on a cold November evening. Adrian invited Caroline to his private office at the hospital under the guise of wanting to talk things through. Caroline, still hopeful that Adrian might choose her, agreed to meet him. The office, located in a secluded wing of the hospital, was the perfect setting for Adrian's scheme. He prepared meticulously, ensuring there would be no witnesses. His method was chillingly calculated. He planned to use a lethal dose of potassium chloride, a drug that would stop Caroline's heart within seconds. As a physician, Adrian had access to the drug and the knowledge to administer it without arousing immediate suspicion. Caroline arrived at the office just after 8 p.m. She looked exhausted, the weight of their situation evident in her tired eyes. Adrian greeted her with a strained smile, offering her a cup of tea, one he had laced with a mild sedative to ensure compliance. As they talked, Adrian feigned remorse, telling Caroline he wanted to find a way to make things work. His words were carefully chosen to disarm her, to make her believe he still cared. Caroline, desperate for reassurance, began to relax, sipping her tea as she listened. Once the sedative took effect, Adrian moved quickly. He retrieved a syringe filled with potassium chloride from a locked drawer and approached Caroline. Her groggy protests were weak and uncoordinated as Adrian injected the drug into her arm. Within moments, her breathing slowed and her body went limp. Adrian stared at Caroline's lifeless form, his mind racing. The gravity of what he had done began to sink in, but he knew he couldn't afford to panic. He had planned this moment meticulously, and now he had to ensure the cover-up was flawless. First, Adrian staged the scene to make it look like Caroline had died of a drug overdose. He placed a vial of morphine and an empty syringe near her body, carefully wiping away his fingerprints. The narrative he intended to create was simple. Caroline, overwhelmed by stress and despair, had taken her own life. Next, Adrian sent a text from Caroline's phone to Derek, a short and cryptic message. "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." He hoped this would further support the illusion of suicide. Finally, Adrian called hospital security, feigning shock and grief as he reported finding Caroline unresponsive in his office. By the time paramedics arrived, Caroline's death appeared to be a tragic but straightforward case of self-harm. For a brief moment, it seemed Adrian's plan might succeed. Hospital staff and investigators initially accepted the suicide narrative, particularly given the apparent evidence and Caroline's recent emotional distress. However, the cracks in Adrian's story began to appear almost immediately. Derek, devastated by the news of Caroline's death, refused to believe she had taken her own life. He described her as a resilient and optimistic person, someone who would never resort to such an act. Emily, too, began connecting the dots. While she had no knowledge of the affair, she had long suspected Adrian was hiding something. His demeanor in the days following Caroline's death struck her as odd. Not grief-stricken but jittery and defensive. The final blow came during the autopsy. The coroner discovered that the levels of potassium chloride in Caroline's system were inconsistent with a self-administered dose. Additionally, the puncture wound on her arm suggested she had been injected by someone else. Faced with mounting evidence, investigators turned their attention to Adrian. His access to the drug, his proximity to the victim, and his increasingly erratic behavior made him a prime suspect. Under intense interrogation, Adrian initially maintained his innocence, insisting he had no role in Caroline's death. However, as detectives presented their findings, his carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a moment of desperation, Adrian confessed, though he attempted to justify his actions. He claimed he had acted out of fear and self-preservation, painting himself as a victim of circumstance rather than a cold-blooded killer. "I didn't know what else to do," he said, his voice trembling. "She was going to ruin everything." Adrian's confession sent shockwaves through the hospital and the community. The truth of his actions shattered the lives of everyone involved, leaving a legacy of betrayal and tragedy that would haunt Graceview General Hospital for years to come. The murder of Caroline Hayes and the subsequent unraveling of Adrian Lockwood's life sent shockwaves through the community. Graceview General Hospital, once a beacon of excellence, was thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. News of the affair and the murder dominated headlines, with lurid details fueling public fascination and outrage. Caroline's death hit her loved ones hardest. Derek was inconsolable, vacillating between profound grief and seething anger. His disbelief that Caroline could have been involved in such a destructive relationship turned to bitterness toward Adrian, whom he viewed as a predator. Derek's family and friends rallied around him, but the scars of betrayal and loss were evident in every facet of his life. Emily Lockwood faced her own reckoning. For years, she had stood by Adrian, supporting him through the grueling demands of his career. The revelation of his affair and subsequent crime shattered her world. Emily filed for divorce almost immediately after Adrian's arrest, choosing to shield her children from the fallout as much as possible. The children, too, were deeply affected. Although Emily tried to preserve a semblance of normalcy, the stigma of their father's actions loomed large. Adrian's eldest daughter, a teenager, faced relentless bullying at school, while his youngest son struggled to understand why their father was no longer around. For the hospital staff, the incident was both a personal and professional blow. Many had worked closely with Adrian and Caroline, never suspecting the dark undercurrents of their relationship. The betrayal of trust was difficult to process, and morale plummeted. Some staff members left Graceview General altogether, unable to reconcile their memories of Adrian with the heinous crime he had committed.